Hi, I'm Gabe Zichermann, and this is today's webinar, which is about gamification and the opportunities for marketers to benefit from using the techniques. It probably comes as no surprise to most of you because we're all deeply in the middle of this, but right now we kind of are suffering from what can only be described as a significant engagement crisis. And some of the things about this engagement crisis are pretty obvious, and some of them are things in which the research is only now beginning to catch up with our understanding of how deeply folks are unable to provide attention or engagement with the world around them. Microsoft Research recently released a study that showed that the average user on the web only spends less than 10 seconds on each website that they visit. And in fact, 98% of people will leave a web page after 10 seconds. And it's kind of funny to think back about it, but it wasn't that long ago actually that it took longer than 10 seconds to load the average web page. So it's especially amusing that folks have so little time, they'll give so little time to judging whether or not a website is meaningful or interesting to them. But it's not just on the web, it also extends kind of to our social and cultural life. This notion of what's called second screening, or using one device while you're doing something like watching television. Recent research from Nielsen says that as much as 4/5 of the population is regularly watching television with another device, and sometimes a third device, like a phone and an iPad, or a phone and a computer. It's interesting to note that it wasn't that long ago that television was itself the distraction from the real world, and now it seems like we can't even do something like watch TV without a distraction from the distraction. And the pervasive energy of social networking, and particularly smartphones, has invaded our lives at the kind of frequency that seems impossible to imagine only 6 or 7 years ago when the current smartphone revolution began. Now, according to research from Forrester, 20% of users of smartphones use them every 10 minutes all day long. That's over 100 uses per day for the average person, and presents an astonishing kind of interruption-oriented economy in which folks are doing almost everything with their smartphone, invading almost everything that they do. And to wit, the changes that this new kind of non-engaged user brings to the market are starting to affect even our more entrenched and more fundamental behaviors, extending well beyond just the notion of how we engage with media. And one of the most interesting anecdotes is the question of driving. And it turns out that for the first time since the beginning of the automobile, interest in driving is actually on the decline among young Americans. And recently, a major auto manufacturer came to me for strategic advice and said, we're facing this sort of problem. We're finding that young folks don't want to drive anymore. And we looked into the details of the research, and what we found was that, in addition to some of the existential concerns, things like the environment or the cost of owning a car, desire for urbanism that are driving a car interest down among the millennial generation, the most striking thing was that because we prohibit the use of cell phones while driving, today's youth are choosing not to drive because they can't Instagram and drive at the same time. They can't Facebook and drive at the same time. They can't tweet and drive. And so they're opting instead to be the passenger of the car. Rather than competing to be the driver, they're competing to be the passenger. And this is such a dramatic sea change, from when probably most of us were kids. It's amusing and interesting to note that that experiences that are more fun and engaging are actually capable of driving out adoption of others. At the heart of the reason for all of these things is the power of games. Now, I didn't make any mention of people's actual gameplay habits, you'll notice, and there's no question that those are on the rise. People are playing more games than ever before and at greater volumes than ever before. But actually, what's behind many of these products and services that are profoundly changing the shape of our attention and engagement and fundamentally rewriting the way that we engage with each other and with the world around us is the power of games baked into non-game experiences rather than games themselves. It's things that borrow lessons from games to make themselves more engaging. For example, the hugely popular photo sharing network, Instagram. Now, for those of you who are observant, it probably won't come as any surprise, but Instagram makes use of a lot of game concepts, like, as you can see, sort of big scoring metrics that are shown right at the top, or their kind of feedback loop that they use in order to get and keep people engaged on a regular basis, more of which we'll talk about later. Or the site mint.com, for example, which has rewritten the rules about how personal finance is done by using game concepts like progress bars, points, and challenges to move people through to a better and more holistic personal financial future. Or Foursquare, which created an entire market and industry around the core concept of getting people to check in somewhere on their mobile device, makes use of extensive game concepts in the form of badges and other interactions, as you can see right here. And Nike Plus, which changed the nature of the entire industry of apparel and fitness by focusing the new challenge on the combination of hardware and software that helps give you game-like feedback about how you perform. It's not just about shoes anymore. Now it's about the overall fun and feedback associated with those shoes. The thing that all of those experiences and examples have in common is the concept called gamification. That's the use of game concepts in environments where you wouldn't normally find them. It is defined as engaging users and changing behavior with the best ideas from games, loyalty programs, and behavioral economics. It's most importantly understood as a process rather than a product that creates this incremental engagement over time, taking the best ideas from games and applying them in a methodological and systemic way to whatever product, service, problem, or opportunity it is that you need to get more engagement from users with, the best ideas from games. Now, it's important also to understand what gamification is not. First and foremost, gamification is not just about throwing some badges up on the web. Badges are important and they're meaningful, as you'll see in some of the examples that we talk about, but they're not enough to drive gamified design. The second thing that gamification is not is it's not about turning everything into a game. This is a really, really common mistake that users make all the time, thinking that what we mean by using game mechanics to engage audiences is to turn things into a game. And in practice, that couldn't be further from the truth in most cases. What we want to do, as I said, is extract the best ideas from games to level the engagement playing field with a world where users are increasingly distracted because of game-like experiences. It's baking those same things that create distraction into the things that we need to get user engagement from. And at the core, that often means extracting the most important design patterns from games. And we're going to talk about what those are today. Now, before we dive into these examples and the design patterns, I should tell you a little bit about me. So, as I said at the beginning, I'm Gabe Zichermann. I've written 3 books on the subject of gamification. My first, Game-Based Marketing, kind of started at the very beginning of this discussion in 2010. And now I have a forthcoming book called The Gamification Revolution, which will hit stands in April and looks at how top leaders are using gamification as a strategy to engage employees and customers. I also run a company called Dopamine with my partners, and Dopamine is a strategic consultancy that helps businesses big and small understand how to use gamification in their business from top to bottom. And principally, we design engaging, gamified loyalty programs for companies. And we've done that in a number of different places, and it's pretty fun. I also am very pleased to be the chair of the Gamification Summit, or GSummit, which this year takes place in San Francisco from April 16th through the 18th. Now, GSummit is an amazing event that you have to attend for a number of different reasons, and you should know the URL gsummit.com for a number of different reasons. First and foremost, because a lot of the examples that I'm going to share with you today are folks who have spoken or will be speaking at Gamification Summit. And if they're previous speakers, you'll definitely want to check out the free videos available on gsummit.com to dig in at greater detail for the summit. The second reason is it's an amazing conference full of some of the best and deepest thinkers on the question of designing engagement, folks with experience being successful and those who are less successful, sharing their best practices, their do's and don'ts, all the insight that you need to make yourself a professional and use gamification in a way that will really be accretive to your business. If you're interested in attending GSummit for the 3 days of hands-on workshops, lectures, and so on, there's a code that Kevin Shane, the director of the conference, has kindly inserted into this presentation. That's WEBMKTG, and you'll save some money and guarantee a space in the event. Of particular interest to many of you and your teams is the gamification certification class that I'll offer at the summit. It's a one-day, hands-on way to get yourself actually certified in gamified design. And the coolest thing about the workshop is that you actually get to bring your best ideas, bring your actual project, the thing that you're working on, your product or service, to the actual event, and we'll work on that together. We'll actually apply gamification to it together in real time during that day, and you'll be able to take back an architecture, a process, and a system that you can use to deliver the gamified final example in your organization. So it's really great, and I encourage you to come, get certified, help propagate the notions of engagement through this process inside of your organization. Now, if you're doing gamification, it's essential to think about what it is that it can deliver. And broadly speaking, I started off by talking about an engagement crisis. And so it's important to then talk about what it is that we want to accomplish with gamification. Great gamification is focused with a laser on the concept of engagement. And when we talk about user engagement, we often talk about 5 core metrics. These metrics are recency, frequency, duration, virality, and ratings. And I talk about them in greater depth in other places, like in my book or on the web. But in a nutshell, the things that you'll notice about this list of engagement metrics, the main thing that you'll probably notice right away is what's not on this list, which isn't meant to be exhaustive, but the main ones. What's not on this list is revenue or sales or checking out or pulling out your wallet. And the important reason why that's not on the list of engagement metrics is that sales and revenue follow engagement, not the other way around. And one of the classic things that gamification has done to kind of change the way that we market products and services is it's turned that notion on its head. Customers are customers from the minute that they first connect with us. And our job as marketers is to deepen and further their engagement over time, eventually yielding revenue. But revenue is the product of engagement, not after. We don't have our first interaction with the customer after they bought something. We should be cultivating a long tail, long-term funnel of engagement with the customer that brings them to buy. And it's now coming to light that if you do your job well, if you drive engagement with consumers using gamification, you can expect to see, and this is just sort of heuristic data, you should be able to see at least a 30% increase in some or all of these metrics. Now, some companies, and I'm going to show you some of the results, some of the companies that I'm going to talk about today have achieved much greater results, and some in their first assay have achieved smaller results. But because this is an iterative process, because gamification is a process, not just a product, it's important to know that this will evolve over time. And if you really dig in and use the techniques that we talk about, you can raise recency, frequency, duration, virality, and ratings, raise engagement with consumers substantially, and do that over the long term. Now, today's webinar is actually sponsored by our partners at Badgeville. Badgeville is one of the world's leading gamification platform providers, one of the pioneers, a great organization, also sponsors at GSummit. And they wanted to share a couple of key data points, a couple of case studies to go along with today's discussion. And of course, as I've talked about raising engagement, one of the first examples that jumps out is, of course, Badgeville working with Bell Media up in Canada, being able to raise retention for Bell by 33% using their gamification system. And EMC, the well-known storage company, you can see breaking down some of those engagement metrics, looking at visits, looking at individual activities, and looking at user consumption. Badgeville, working together with EMC, was able to drive a greater amount of adoption. And you can check out examples from Badgeville on their website, which is badgeville.com, and also some of their customer case studies, which are in today's discussion as well. See Chris Duggan, their CEO and visionary founder, speak at GSummit. Okay, so let's take a step back and understand why it is that gamification works. Now, there's a few different reasons why it works. One of the obvious ones, of course, is that we are designing deliberately for engagement, and that alone should produce better results than simply hoping that engagement will happen. But there's actually core science and design patterns that explain why gamification works, and I want to talk about them today. Principally among the scientific reasons is the concept called intrinsic reinforcement. And here's how it works. Humans fundamentally, anytime we challenge ourselves to something, anything at all, doesn't matter what it is, how mundane or significant, whether that's learning a new language, climbing a mountain, what have you, and we achieve that thing, our brain secretes a little bit of a magical neurochemical called dopamine. Now, dopamine, as you know, or many of you probably know, is a pleasure drug. It's pleasurable. And so it means that challenging ourselves and then achieving that thing produces a pleasurable response in the brain. And to take a step, to kick it up even a notch, it turns out that dopamine is even released in anticipation of achieving that positive result. Now, when we think about the regular world, so the ungamified world, the world outside of games, we realize that the dopamine rush doesn't happen all that often. I mean, how many times can you beat your personal best in a marathon or learn a new language or something? But in the context of games and gamification, we engineer the experience to produce this challenge achievement dopamine release in a kind of consistent and repeating way to drive people's behavior forward, to create that pleasurable response and to make them want to do that experience again, to move forward, to move forward. So sometimes this challenge achievement dopamine release can come from something that, maybe we don't think people will be all that interested in. And a great example of that is a little gamified example called Domino's Pizza Hero. Released last year, Domino's created a little gamified system that you can play on your smartphone. And basically the idea is that you act like a pizzaiolo, a person who makes pizzas, and you basically compose your ideal perfect Domino's pizza using toppings. You have to spin the dough, you've got to put it in the oven at the right time, take it out at the right time. It really is somewhat challenging, actually. And brilliantly, Domino's then enables you to actually check out, so order the pizza from the one that you actually made. Test yourself, challenge yourself, get better at it, then actually order the product, and in a kind of funny twist, recruit potential pizzaiolos from the Domino's Pizza Hero community. So there's actually this sort of backdoor to growing the Domino's family overall. But within a few weeks of its release, Domino's Pizza Hero had over 1 million uses and was generating multiple millions of dollars in revenue for the company, all from having people play a pizza maker, which is inherently not the kind of thing that we first think of people will respond positively to. But it turns out that that challenge achievement loop with a little bit of novelty, and we'll talk more about that in a minute, can be very powerful even if the activity doesn't seem to surface all that much interest overall. Another great example of this is this concept, which I talk about a lot, but I love it so much, called speed camera lottery. And I'm sure most of you joining us today have at one point or another thought about or seen a speeding camera. I mean, some of you may have already been the victims of one. But basically the concept in a speeding camera is it takes your picture, you're speeding, takes your picture, you get a ticket in the mail. And in Sweden, as in many of the Nordic countries, the speeding ticket that you get isn't based on how fast you're going, it's based on how much money you make. So you can get a humongous ticket. In fact, Sweden gave out, I think, a $250,000 ticket not that long ago. So the way that speed camera lottery works, which was designed by a guy named Kevin Richardson, who spoke at GSummit a while back, is that instead of you just driving by the speeding camera and you get your ticket in the mail, every time you drive by the speeding camera at or below the speed limit, you're automatically entered into a lottery to split the proceeds of the people who speed. So the concept is that when you comply with the process, when you comply with the speeding requirement, you get a little bit of positive reinforcement, a little bit of challenge, achievement, dopamine release. If you don't comply with it, you still get punished. Now, this has been one of the most successful methods for changing behavior in history. It might not surprise you to know that changing enforcement levels and changing the speeding limit in the United States has been shown over the last 40 or 50 years to have basically no effect on people speeding. But speed camera lottery, using this concept of gamification, lowered speeding by 20% at the point of intervention. And at its core, it brings together two of the most important elements of gamified design. One of them is the concept of intrinsic reinforcement, challenge, achievement, and dopamine. The other is one of the core design concepts, which we call the 3 Fs: feedback, friends, and fun. It turns out that the more of feedback, friends, and fun a system has, the more it has of the 3 Fs, the more engaged people generally are with it, the more they want to do it, the more they keep coming back to it. Feedback, friends, and fun. Now, we're going to talk about some examples that highlight these in different degrees. Feedback is, of course, the system telling you how you're doing. Friends is your social graph or your coworkers. And fun is a little bit more complicated. Fun isn't the kind of thing that comes easily to everyone and isn't the same for everyone. And so it's particularly important for us to pay attention to some of these examples and how they differ. So we talked about Nike a little bit earlier on, but just to come back to it, at its core, Nike Plus has really put Nike back on top in terms of hardcore athletics. The company had sort of lost much of that brand ground to New Balance only a few short years ago. And they built this system that's a combination of product and service. So there's a little device in a shoe where you clip on your body, and then a software application that you use. And Nike Plus tracks all of your activity, all of your physical activity, and then reports back on it. Shows you your stats, shows you your performance, allows you to compare yourself against your friends, gives you positive reinforcement. And mostly, it hinges on this notion of feedback, friends, and fun, but particularly around feedback, giving you information about how you're doing and how you're progressing. And that's enabled Nike to really accomplish a few key things. Today, over 5 million people use Nike Plus on a regular basis. And that's a huge stat considering how few people run on a regular basis overall in the US. But more importantly, it's really redefined the landscape, the competitive landscape for what it means to be a company like Nike. Now it's about much more than selling shoes. It's about selling the whole user experience around that shoes, the personal progress towards your goal. Because Nike Plus isn't just a product you clip on your shoes. Nike Plus is how you measure your personal progress against your goals. Ultimately, the shoes and the hardware and the software contribute to an individual sense of progress. And that's a key notion for how to make gamification compelling. And on the progress note, Mint reveals to us a very specific other marketing and design concept for gamification. Mint.com, of course, been very, very successful transforming personal finance. Absolutely decimated the existing market that came before it in the Microsoft Money and Quicken. And the main thing that Mint.com's designers really understood was this idea that the interval between action and reward in personal finance is really big. So when you ask somebody to do something like save money, they take a hit today, so they feel pain today for a great deal of deferred results that may come 10, 20, or 30 years down the road. That's pretty much too long for people to feel satisfied. So what Mint.com did, which was very interesting, is it shortened the interval for positive feedback in the finance market. So now you can take these challenges, as you can see here, the kind of financially fit challenge in Mint, which awards you points for taking actions in real time. The long-term results of those actions, so you saving a ton of money for your retirement, that you won't feel for dozens of years, and there's nothing we can do about that. But what we can do is give you a reward for taking the more painful or difficult choices today so that we set you on the right path. And we keep giving you that positive feedback, and we bring in friends. Mint, of course, socialize a great amount of personal finance choices, and we make it fun. See your progress. You can see that sort of progress bar across the top as it completes. That's a core kind of element or mechanic that you can use, especially when your product or service requires people to defer satisfaction over some period of time. And another great example of using feedback, friends, and fun is the Tabasco Nation community. And many of you are, of course, familiar with Tabasco, which is a hot sauce. I think the world's most popular hot sauce, if I understand correctly. And the Tabasco Nation was a conceit that, why don't you tell us about every single thing that you do with Tabasco? In this case, measure your drops. And the core concept is that look at how hot you are. You can, measure every drop of Tabasco that you use. Come on this Facebook app, measure all the drops of Tabasco, take various challenges to socialize Tabasco, use it in new ways, take pictures of yourself eating it, see who's the strongman who can eat the hottest food, blah, blah, blah. And along the way, engage with yourself and a like-minded community of people around this product, around Tabasco sauce. And in the time since the launch of the Tabasco Nation, Tabasco has doubled the number of people in their social media context. They've actually doubled their number of Facebook fans from just about 500,000 to about 1 million, and substantially raised their engagement all around this little concept of measuring your drops. So you'll notice that this measuring your drops is very similar to the points, miles, or distance run, or so on that you might see in other gamified experiences. It's at the heart of it is feedback, friends, and fun. Also core to the design of this particular construct is a concept called the Desire Engine. And this is a design concept by a guy named Nir Eyal, who you can come and see at Gamification Summit, GSummit.com, in April. Nir is a lecturer at Stanford, really brilliant entrepreneur and a designer. And he defined this concept called the Desire Engine, which really explains how we get a user from a sort of non-moving state to this highly engaged, repetitive behavior kind of user, like we've seen in Tabasco, Mint, or any of the other examples I'm going to show you. And basically, the desire engine, which Nir will be talking about, takes us from a trigger, which can be internal or external. So I want to improve my personal finances, or a friend says, hey, you should improve your personal finances, to action, where we do something, a variable reward, where we, where the system gives the user some kind of reward that they can get that's, uneven potentially, like sometimes it's high, sometimes it's low, you don't know. And then commitment, which is an important stage in the desire engine, where the user reestablishes their commitment by taking a further action. And that prompts them to go and get another trigger or give another trigger, and the loop continues again. And critically, each one of the examples that we've talked about uses some element of this design. Another core concept in gamified marketing is the notion of autonomy, mastery, and purpose. This is pretty deep stuff. If you've read the book Drive, you'll be familiar with some of the concepts in it. And so autonomy, mastery, and purpose is a way of understanding, what users get out of your system, and baking this idea into marketing helps dramatically. So one example of this at work comes from the company Autodesk, which recently launched a gamification example for their 3D design software. They have a free trial to converted paid model, where you can get a free trial of their software, use it for 30 days, and then buy it. And the software, I think, retails for around $3,500, so it's a pretty expensive product. And what they realized was they needed to both raise trial usage and also get people to use the application more if they wanted to raise a conversion to paid. So they built this game, I would say loosely inspired by Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego, that involves doing a series of missions that both are entertaining and interesting, but also highlight how the application works, how the product works, and teach you how to use it in this kind of fun, lightweight way. And it's got points, and it's got leaderboards, and it has progress mechanics, all the things you'd expect to see in a gamified system. But the point is to make that fun and to bring in some feedback and give you a sense of mastery over the app, knowing that that would produce better results. And of course it did. The gamified trial conversion system for Autodesk has actually raised trial usage by about 40%, and increased conversion rates by 15%, increased actual sales by 15% for Autodesk products, which is a momentous amount. And the Autodesk folks will actually be at GSummit talking in detail about their project. Another example coming from a slightly different space is IBM's Innovate. The company built an internal BPM system, business process management system, designed to help them figure out sort of BPM problems, and then thought, what if we take this BPM system and make it available on the web? What if we take it and make it something that educational institutions and nonprofits can use to help understand their business process? And they built a couple of different versions off this, couple of different gamified experiences off of this platform, including the one that you're looking at here, which is called City Manager. And it's a kind of SimCity-ish game that you can play if you run a city. For example, if you actually work in urban development or planning or municipal management. And the amazing thing about Innovate at IBM, this free app, today is used by about 1,000 institutions in real time, and it has become IBM's #1 lead generation tool across the organization worldwide. So this free gamified thing that they put up on their website has become their key lead generator, which was never the intention of it, but it shows even in B2B contexts how powerful it can be to introduce feedback, friends, and fun, and purpose, and autonomy, and mastery into the world. And one more example on this context. Oh, and of course you can see Phaedra Boendiris, the creator of Innovate from IBM at GSummit in April. It should be really interesting. And from a previous speaker from last year, one of last year's featured speakers, this is a product called Fold It from the University of Washington, and it's a really interesting case study. Basically, scientists need to be able to figure out the structure of proteins, and in order to develop new drugs and solve major medical problems. And doing that is actually a really challenging thing to do. It turns out you have to do all this kind of complicated visual math to be able to do it, and computers are actually not very good at doing it, but humans are instinctively very good at doing this protein sequencing problem. So UW built a game, a protein folding app called Fold It, which is a game in which you fold proteins. And last year, Fold It had a major breakthrough. Scientists had been working for about 15 years to discover the structure of a critical protein in the fight against HIV and AIDS, and they'd really been stumped for 15 years. And last year, 49,000 people playing Foldit solved this problem in about 10 days. Truly, from 15 years to 10 days. And what's especially interesting about this example, and should be an important note for marketers, are two critical things. The first one is that Foldit managed to do this complicated math problem with a community that they found out only half of the people involved in had a math or science background. So 50% of the people who participated in this pretty complicated project had no math or science background at all. They came to this challenging thing without having some of those basics. So they were interested. And the second piece of it, which I think is especially interesting, is the idea that they didn't try to hide that complexity in Foldit. They actually left the complexity right in front of the user. They said, though, that you can participate in this with a higher purpose or greater meaning. They showed you your progress, your team's progress, the world's progress at trying to complete this protein structure, so that is solving this problem and achieving this goal. They showed all of those things. They made you feel like it counted. And they made it obvious that you could be part of and subscribe to a higher purpose and a higher degree of greater complexity than just what we normally think people are willing to do. And that to me is both very heartening, but also an important lesson about gamification. If we deliver the experience in the right way, so we give people feedback, friends, and fun, mastery, autonomy, and purpose, they can do things that we normally don't think they could or would be willing to do. For a marketer looking to get consumers to take some kind of action, whether that's for social good, so as part of a broader social good campaign, maybe getting out and helping people clean up or rebuild, or doing work with the poor, it turns out that that is possible using gamification, and Foldit is just one of a number of examples of using gamification for social good. If, however, we're going to be delivering an experience that leverages gamification in this way, we also need to think about the third major design pattern, and that's rewards. We have a mnemonic for thinking about rewards called SAPS, and it stands for status, access, power, and stuff. And this is the list of rewards that consumers want from you in exchange for their engagement and loyalty. And it's in order of stickiest to least sticky, and also most meaningful to least meaningful, and probably most importantly for many of you, cheapest to most expensive. It turns out, and I know that this is a little bit controversial, but it turns out that status, access, and power all motivate and engage people better than stuff. Free things, stuff being free things, discounts, giveaways, and so on. When we give people status, the ability to level up against others in the world, access, the ability to get things that they can't really buy for money, but things which are special experiences, and power, which is control over other people in the world, real or virtual, they tend to value those things more than free stuff, discounts, and coupons and giveaways. And some of the best gamified examples make extensive use of the first three letters in SAPS to create tremendous engagement with users and, in some cases, redefine their markets. So one example of that is CNN's iWork, which many of you might be familiar with. And iWork, over the last 5 or 6 years, it's a site that allows you to upload a camera phone video, a news story basically, from anywhere in the world to CNN just from your phone. And it's been around for about 6 years or so. And in that period of time, CNN's iReport has had about 1 million people file close to 5 million stories for CNN. And that's 1 million people, 5 million stories, about 6 years on iReport. And in that space of time, none of those people have been paid anything at all for their work. They haven't even been offered something like a nominal kind of, 10 cents per million views like YouTube might offer you if you have a big, a big following on YouTube. They don't even do that. They simply offer them the benefits of, principally, of status associated with iWork. And that really is that people are paying to get their video up on the homepage of CNN.com. And if it's really great, up on the actual, broadcast network that's broadcasting to the whole world. And it turns out that when you offer that benefit appropriately to people, they don't even necessarily, expect to get, a kind of direct, tangible reward. I'm not saying that you can't offer that tangible reward, but it's not necessary for them to receive it. Status is enough to drive, a lot of activity here. And by the way, before you think it's just a side project, the iReport may not have changed, the way that CNN gathers news for every story, but it has scooped a number of things, including the Asian tsunami and the collapsing, the collapse of that bridge. I think it was in Minnesota from a few years back. All of those things. Oh, and the London bombings. All of those things are scooped on iReport. So it's actually been very, very popular and successful. And for any marketer looking to build a community, provide some template for how you might be able to do that. And another good example comes from Gilt Group, and many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with Gilt's daily high-end fashion sales model. So every day at 12 o'clock, you can do a sort of what you could think of as a digital sample sale for high-end fashion goods. If you're in the top 1% of Gilt shoppers, they will induct you into the Gilt Noir program, which is a kind of loyalty program for their top shoppers. And what's fascinating about Gilt Noir, what's really, really interesting to me about Gilt Noir, is what you get in the mail, what you get as part of being Gilt Noir is this little box that comes in the mail to you. It's got a scented candle, it's got a little gatefold brochure, and a black card. And what you get as a member of Gilt Noir is not discounts on stuff. It's not points that you can redeem later for free things in the Gilt store or discounts off merchandise or whatever. What you get as a member of Gilt Noir is a 15-minute head start on the sale every day. So your sale begins at 11:45, not at 12 o'clock like everyone else. Effectively, you get 15 extra minutes to spend money with the company every single day. No discounts, no free things. It's a sort of win-win, right? Obviously, as an end user, you get your first pick of the merchandise before it sells out. And for the company, it's a low-cost or no-cost way, if you want, to ensure that their best customers are well served and feel like they're getting something of value. This kind of access benefit is one of gamification's most powerful, compelling, and enduring concepts, and fits neatly into the notion of SAPs. And you've seen, probably for those of you who are loyalty program experts or interested in gamified loyalty, you'll see many examples of this in more sophisticated ways done by various kind of large-scale loyalty programs as the gamification concepts extend into the rest of the world. Fundamentally, these things all together comprise an overarching system in this particular world that we're talking about called gamification. And this engagement crisis that we find ourselves on the cusp of or in the middle of, for those of you who, especially for those of you who work in the advertising side, this is a very, very real part of our lives today. It's increasingly difficult to get and keep anyone's attention. But if we don't get and keep people's attention, if we don't change consumer behavior, engage them, get them where we need them to go, we aren't able to connect them with our brands. We aren't able to illustrate all the value propositions that we have to offer. We aren't able to get them to share and socialize what it is that we have to give other people. It's not enough anymore just to build a great product. And let's be clear, you still need to have a great product before we can use gamification to make it magical and really drive the amazing engagement that you've seen here. You need to have a great product, but that's not enough anymore. You need to be able to cut through the noise. You need to be able to capture and maintain people's engagement. And to do that, you'll need to understand the core concepts of gamification. You'll need to know how intrinsic reinforcement works and bake that into your product. You need to understand how to design and build an engagement program that focuses on the 5 E's, 5 E metrics. You need to integrate feedback, friends, and fun into every aspect of your service and build it around the desire engine, and its triggers and rewards. You need to think about mastery, autonomy, and purpose, and deliver that to your users in what you do, and structure your rewards using the SAPS model. And all of those things together can form a process of creating continuous engagement. And if we think that today's engagement crisis is challenging, I believe that we're on the cusp of an even bigger problem, and that is this next generation, the millennial generation and younger, who grew up in an even more gamified world, they'll have even greater demands. And they're not going to, if today's sort of 20-somethings are difficult to reach, this new consumer, they're not even going to look at your product or service or understand how to relate to your brand unless it contains the gamified elements that we've talked about. It needs to have these items, it needs to have these constructs, it needs to have this notion of continuous engagement and positive reinforcement to get, keep, and maintain their attention. Luckily for all of us, we have these techniques at our disposal, and we're going to be able to apply the best ideas from games, loyalty programs, and behavioral economics to whatever marketing it is that we do. We don't need to be game companies, but we certainly can take their ideas and use them in service of connecting consumers with our brands. So once again, I want to invite all of you to come to GSummit in April if you're interested further in this topic and learn more, see some of the great speakers there, come hear us talk, join one of our workshops, and so on. It's a great opportunity to get more connected to this community and how gamification can and will work in your environment and how you can level the playing field in this busy and noisy world that we live in. So I'm Gabe Zichermann. You can find me on Twitter at @GZichermann. I think we still have a few minutes for questions. So I'm looking forward to answering some of those questions of yours. Feel free to click your question buttons, and Ivan will help us. Get sorted.
All right, Gabe. Thank you very much for that great talk. That was amazing. Yes. And I have some questions here from a number of our viewers. So the first one here right now is from Akansha, and she asks, should we look for a 30% regarding those 5 E's you had mentioned? Is that, and over what period of time should we look for that 30% increase?
That's an awesome question, Akansha. Thank you so much for asking. One of the things that I talked about was gamification as an iterative process, and that means that in some cases, the first version that you put out is not going to produce that bump immediately. You may have to work at it a little bit to get user engagement up, recency, frequency, duration, virality, ratings, sales, so on. You may need to work on that through a series of iterations as you learn what it is that your community can and will do. We often talk about in the gamification workshops that gamification is a very agile process, and that is to say it's iterative, it's ongoing. We need to make an investment in it for the medium to long term. So we start with a kind of tentpole set of design concepts, and then we iterate from there to drive that forward. Now, I would say to you, in a more practical sense, from whatever our opening kind of gambit is with gamified design, we should be able to reach our target growth metrics within a 12-month period of launching. Some companies have reported much faster results on the marketing side because, let's be honest, novelty sells, right? If we do something new, especially if a consumer is used to a pretty boring or gray or dry interaction with our business, as soon as we introduce something that's even just a little bit fun or surprising, we're going to get a kind of instant bump out of user behavior. The trick is to turn that instant bump into a sustained, ongoing engagement improvement over time, including the viral loop and bringing new people into it over time. That takes a little while to do, but certainly, we would expect to be able to start seeing some of those great results in the first year.
Fantastic. All right. Our next question comes from Sam, and he asks, does fun mean the same for everyone, or do you need to find out what your target market thinks is fun?
That's an awesome question, Sam. Thanks so much for asking that. Often I talk about this in more detail, and it forms a big part of the work that we did in Gamification by Design, which was my more design-oriented book that I did with O'Reilly, and also a kind of core concept in the gamification workshops that I teach, like the one at GSummit, is this notion of figuring out what's fun for the user, which will define more or less what a fun experience might be. We use a few different models for figuring that out, and one of the most common ones is what's called a player typology. And that comes from concepts of game design, and it really often divides the consumer base into 3 or 4 main categories. And I'm not going to go into that in too much detail here because it's pretty involved, but suffice it to say, for a marketing, advertising, or product-oriented person, what's critical to understand about player typing is that we care a lot less about the demographics of users than we care about their motivational affect. And what that means is what motivates them in life, what's actually moving them forward in life, is much more important than what demographics they have, because their motivational state will tell us what they think is fun, whereas their demographics don't really necessarily give us a good sense of that. So we want to start by using one of the kind of motivational segmentation tools that we use in gamification, and that's really core to the success of so many gamified applications, and certainly for games as well, is understanding the motivational state of users. It's really different from the way that marketing folks think about it in general. And so luckily, I have kind of a marketing background, and now all this gamification experience, so I'm able to kind of translate those ideas when we do a workshop or whatever into more marketing terminology. But it's important for us to start moving away from just demographics and start thinking about motivation.
All right, thank you for that, Gabe. We have another question from John here about Foldit, and he asks, do successful participants in Foldit share in any royalties developed from the product? He's wondering where the reward comes in with this example.
That's another awesome question. You guys have such interesting questions. I love it. Like I talked about kind of with CNN or like with Foldit, many of these experiences aren't actually about sharing revenues, royalties with users. And they're really about tapping into people's, non-tangible reward model and giving them the status, access, and power benefits that they're seeking, rather than just focusing on stuff. One of the most interesting companies, now that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be giving people some kind of tangible rewards, by the way, I just want to be clear. I'm not anti-tangible rewards. I'm not anti, giving people, bonuses or free things or whatever. We just have to acknowledge that bonuses and discounts and free stuff are sort of weak. They're not really powerful tools for creating long-term engagement. And that's because consumers very quickly price those things into their expected behavior with a brand or service or experience. So that is to say, for example, I don't want to single anyone out here, but some of you might be familiar if you know Bed Bath & Beyond. They famously, this retailer, they send out these 20% off coupons to consumers, and they're so common and so ubiquitous. It's hard to imagine going into a Bed Bath & Beyond without one of those 20% coupons. Or if any of you are on the mailing list for the Gap or Old Navy, you know that you basically get a 30, 40, 50% off mailing from those guys once every week or every 2 weeks. And it sort of creates a kind of expectation that free stuff is always there and always part of the equation. People price in free things very quickly. They're not scalable. It costs a lot of money to keep rewarding people with cash or free things. Whereas status, access, and power are things which can be scaled up because they're basically virtual. Now, I would encourage you, if you're interested in the intersection of marketing, kind of the crowd, whether that's from a marketing standpoint or from a product design standpoint, you might want to check out a company called Quirky, Quirky. We talk about Quirky in the Gamification Revolution. It's pretty interesting. It's a crowdsourced kind of a product design site that uses many gamification elements. But one of my favorite things about Quirky is this. Basically, you come up with an idea, and then people contribute to refining your idea. And if the idea is good enough and people like it enough and they refine it enough, Quirky will actually manufacture your concept. So it's like physical product crowdsourced manufacturing. And in the end, they have this kind of complicated model where everybody kind of shares in the revenue above a certain threshold. And so they have these like small fractions of a percent that everybody can earn as part of the process. And so it's a little bit, kind of absurdist. But what's really interesting about it is when you buy a product from Quirky, every single person's name who contributed to that product in any way through the process is printed in the brochure in the folder that comes with the product that arrives at your house. And it shows you what percentages people actually earned for those who are earning money. So even the people who are earning kind of small amounts of money or no amount of money, they get some status reward. They see their name attached to this cool product. Their name, it's like your name being on the credits of a movie that you really like. So, but you don't necessarily get points at the box office. It's that kind of dichotomy and tension. And so I'm not advocating for not giving people any physical rewards or any cash for their contribution or for a job well done or as a marketer. I just think that we need to move to an era, and gamification is pointing out the way. We need to move to an era in which we focus on the non-tangible emotional rewards for users first and foremost, and then offer them the compensatory rewards thereafter.
Oh, very good answer. And going off of that, there's another question here from John who sort of speaks to this a little bit. Now, we want to do that, but is there a risk that we can wear out consumers if everything they buy or shop is using gamified marketing?
The question, great question, John. Thanks so much. The question of kind of saturation in the market from gamification is a great question. I think there's definitely the possibility that if everybody gamified everything, then gamification would just be normal and it wouldn't be unusual. And I think there's both a plus and a minus to that, right? On the minus side, obviously, its efficacy would reduce over time, but frankly, we're very far away from that today. If you look around, I just want to encourage all of you to look around, take a couple of hours after this webinar today, and pay very close attention to the interactions that you have with the products, services, companies that you do business with for the rest of the day today, and pay close attention to how rewarding they are. Pay close attention to how much feedback, friends, and fun is in every one of those interactions. And I guarantee you, once you start looking around, you'll see how bleak the landscape is when it comes to feedback, friends, and fun around you. How many opportunities there are in the world to, as a smart marketer, apply the principles of gamification to create engagement with users. Today, the world is still the vast majority of the world is ungamified. And that's part of the reason why we're so optimistic and why there's so much enthusiasm and dopamine for the gamified loyalty programs that we build or at GSummit among attendees and the speakers. It's like we're still on the cusp of this. We're still at the very early days of this, but most of our lives are still really gray and really dry. And there's so much more that we can do to make them fun. And that's obviously very inspiring to me, and I hope it's inspiring to you as well.
Absolutely, certainly is. And we have another question coming from Samarth, who asks, is gamification all web-based?
Great question. Thanks for asking. I've talked mostly about kind of web examples today, and also obviously many mobile and phone examples. Clearly, smartphone design, smartphone technology has been essential for a lot of these gamified examples that we've talked about today. It certainly helps to have smartphones and helps to have the web, but many people do gamification in much lower tech. I would encourage you to check out on GSummit, check out the speaker John Guerrera, who talked about gamifying his life using Post-it notes mostly. John will be back this year as well to talk about the updates about that and how he used personal gamification with pen and paper to get his dream job and write a book and all this great stuff that he's been able to do. So you can do gamification much lower tech than than using the web or using software. But certainly, if you're going to do it, and if you're going to do it in a contemporary marketing sense, it's almost certainly true that you're going to use technology. And then you definitely want to check out key leaders, platform leaders like Badgeville, who can help you scale up your technical requirements for a gamified solution. And you want to get yourself as knowledgeable as possible about the technology. But ultimately, doing good gamification is mostly a design challenge. You've got these great technology providers that can help you both with products and services, but at the heart is a real design challenge for marketers. It's a different kind of design thinking. It's a new way of viewing the world and consumers. It's about baking all of these ideas into every aspect of your brand and marketing communications. And that's really about becoming the chief engagement officer for your organization, a trend that we're increasingly seeing.
CEO, modern. All right, and our next question here comes from Tiago, who asks, I've seen quite a few examples of status, access, and stuff, but power hasn't made much of an appearance. Either that or I haven't noticed it. Are there any good examples from the use of power type rewards?
That's an awesome question, Tiago. So the power rewards, most of the power rewards that we see are actually pretty small and incremental uses. So you'll see things like people being able to bring a friend to an event, as an example, or nominate a friend for a particular level, a status or other kind of level. In the classic loyalty program space, once you reach certain thresholds, like a million mile status, for example, in some airlines, you're actually able to nominate or designate somebody else to get your status with you. And that kind of gives you a certain amount of power. So many of those power benefits are really tempered by being in the context of some other benefit or other benefit set that you get. The SAPS model, most of the rewards that we give users in the SAPS model, they really touch on multiple rewards. They're not exclusively status, exclusively access, or exclusively power, exclusively stuff. They have a combination of all of those things in them, as one idea in different permutations. And so whenever we think about reward models, like the reward design stuff that we do in the gamification workshop at GSummit, I always encourage people to think about that a little bit more laterally and see them as more whole experiences.
Awesome, awesome. And we're coming up to our end of the webinar here, so we can only take one more question. So here's one final one from Romina, who asks, inside of a gamified system, how do you measure ROI? If you're going to sell a gamified environment to your client, you're going to need some data to back it up. So how do you do that?
Great question, Romina, and an awesome question to end on because, one of the things is gamification sounds like, oh my God, it's so fun. We're all going to play and make games all day. But in practice, this is hard work. Just like all of you who are professional marketers will know that maybe, in early days when you first thought about going into marketing or advertising, like many folks, you probably thought, oh, it's, just one episode of Mad Men after another, just coming up with great creative ideas and throwing them against the wall. But in practice, the discipline of marketing is really a detail-oriented discipline. And similarly with gamification, the process of gamification is a data and detail-oriented discipline. Brenda Garno, really famous game designer, once said that the most important tool for a game designer is a spreadsheet, which shocks people when they hear it, but it's true. We think a great deal about the details, about the minutia, about the micro elements of interactions between users, because ultimately what we're trying to do is construct an experience, construct a system that engages people in the long term. And that's a big part of the discipline that we talk about at GSummit, in my workshops, in my book, and so on, is how we drive user behavior in that way, how we come up with the details and get people to go where they need to go. So in practical terms, if you're thinking about doing a gamification process inside your organization, I highly encourage you to check out Gamification by Design. Come to GSummit in April. It would be great to see you there. Join us for a workshop. But begin with the process of identifying what the metrics are that you need to move. Start with those 5 E metrics. Look at where you currently are, establish a baseline. Look at how the funnel of those metrics goes down into revenue. Establish what it is that would be an appropriate target. You can use 30% after a year, maybe as a benchmark overall, not for each one, but overall. And then work backwards to creating a series of interactions that will drive those particular benefits. There aren't really a ton of great shortcuts here. You need to do the hard design work. That's why the discipline that we teach is so important. You need to do the hard design work to get people where you need them to go. And that's the promise of marketing with gamification.
All right, Gabe, so I guess that's all the time we have now today for our marketing gamification webinar. My name is Ivan Kuo, and I've been your host. Gabe, do you have any final words before we leave?
No, I'm all set. Thanks, everyone. I hope to see you at GSummit in April.
All right, thank you, Gabe, and thank you, everyone, for coming. Hope to see you soon.